18 here with For My Canada. Hope you guys are having a great start to 2026. I know we have all been thinking about C-9, that hate speech legislation that hit the headlines right before Christmas. And I know many people have been asking the question, what are we going to do? What can we do? What's happening? What's going on? So in a moment here, this is amazing. I've got none other than Member of Parliament Andrew Lawton, one of the leading voices on this issue, who joined me to give a bit of an update. But before we dive into that, I want to say, please, wherever you're watching this, like, subscribe, share, follow, comment in the feeds, because that's what helps us get this word out far and wide. Second thing I want to say is make sure you swing by formycanada.com, because we are launching a response to this whole situation with C-9. We're calling it the 12 Days for Freedom. Beginning on January the 15th, we're calling folks like you and myself who care about religious freedom, faith freedom in Canada, to do something super, super easy. And that's simply make 5 phone calls a day to a contact list, a target list of members of parliament that have the most power in this situation right now. We're going to be making 5 phone calls a day to each of these members of parliament, asking them to vote against C-9 when it comes back to the floor of the House of Commons. It'll only take about 10-15 minutes a day. And if even just a few hundred of us do this for 12 days for freedom, we can literally make tens of thousands of phone calls, and this will have a major, major impact. So definitely want to invite you to do that. If you do nothing else, if you don't even watch this interview that we're about to show you, swing by formycanada.com and sign up for the 12 Days of Freedom. Also want to let you know, January the 20th is a day of prayer for this issue in Canada. So be watching for that online and make sure you participate, or better yet, host a prayer meeting in your own church or home the night of January the 20th to pray for religious freedom in Canada. Your prayers are powerful. So much else I could say or cover up, but I'm not going to waste any more time. Just get on our email list, go to formycanada.com, and you'll be looped into everything that's going to be happening down the line. So on that note, I want to invite Andrew Lawton, Member of Parliament, newly elected, sitting on the Justice Committee, leading the charge on this issue of C-9. Thanks for joining me today, Andrew.
It's always good to be with you, Fatine. Thanks for having me.
Well, for our viewers, Andrew, give us a quick reminder of what exactly is going on here with C-9 and what are some of the key issues that you have been raising about it there at the committee.
So let me say first and foremost, I do have a full respect and appreciation for the circumstances that the Liberal government has cited in bringing in C-9. We have seen over the last 2.5 years a rampant rise in anti-Semitism in particular. We've seen Jewish-owned businesses targeted. We've seen Jewish neighborhoods targeted. And I'm very mindful of the fact that the Jewish community since October 7th in particular has been crying out for action. But the problem has been a lack of enforcement of existing laws and a lack of political leadership around how we can use existing laws. The Liberal government has, in Bill C-9, used this, what I would characterize as their inaction over the last 2+ years, to say that what we really need is an overhaul in the criminal code. And they've said that C-9 is their answer to this. And what the bill does, despite its noble intentions, is actually lower the threshold and lowers the standard by which one could be charged with hate speech or charged with a hate crime in Canada, and replaces it with a very murky definition that has been putting up alarms all over the place from different faith communities, civil liberties groups, organizations on the political left and the political right. So there were already problems with Bill C-9 as presented. But in the committee process, and this is before the Justice Committee, which is the committee that I have the privilege of serving on, the bill got outright dangerous. An amendment put forward by the Bloc Québécois and voted for by the Liberal members of the committee has eliminated from the criminal code, or I should say will eliminate if C-9 passes, long-standing criminal code protections for religious speech that pertain to if you are expressing a religious view in good faith, or if you are even citing a religious text in good faith. After this amendment, this will now subject you potentially to hate charges. And this is why we are sounding the alarm. This is an all-out assault on religious liberty and freedom of expression in Canada, and this bill cannot be allowed to pass.
Okay, well, that was a huge data dump there. Thank you so much, too, for just highlighting that the whole motivation, initial rationale behind this was to protect Canadians who are the victims of anti Semitic behavior. But like you said, we've already got laws that criminalize that type of behavior, and not just against the Jewish community, but the faith community, the Christian community. Of course, we've seen an unprecedented number of church burnings in Canada over the last decade. And so the real issue with this is that amendment that would remove protection for sincerely held faith beliefs. Now, I want to needle into this a little bit. Of course, the chair of the Justice Committee, Mark Miller, who's now since been removed, is on record saying that he believes that certain parts of the Torah and the Bible, Old and New Testament, are hate speech and that people should be criminally prosecuted for that. And so, unpack this a little bit for us, Andrew. Help us understand it all.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. And it's worth noting that Mark Miller, when he was the chair of the Justice Committee, was this was speaking to Bill C-9 before it was amended. And he was actually saying that he believes there are hateful verses of Scripture. He singled out, I believe it was Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Romans. And he said that if you cite these things, you should be held up and prosecutors should be able to, his words, press charges. And he said that there is no good faith way that you could cite some of these scripture verses. So already we saw a pretty concerning signal from the Liberal government about the way it views not just religious freedom, but quite frankly, the way they view what worship is and what faith beliefs are and what people of faith stand for in this country. And not long after those comments, he was actually promoted to being a member of cabinet. So he's now the minister responsible for Canadian identity in Mark Carney's government. But it was an indication of something that we've seen a bit of a trend of from this government, in that going back some years ago, I can't remember exactly when, any organization that received funding under the Canada Summer Jobs Program to, hire a summer student to do something, was going to be subject to a values test. You couldn't have pro-life beliefs, for example. That was something that they ultimately backtracked on, but was a pretty important signal of where they stand on issues to do with religious freedom. I should say about a year ago now, there was a move underway to strip charitable status away from religious institutions, including churches, mosques, synagogues. This was something that the Finance Committee, the Liberal NDP members, had banded together to recommend. Fortunately, with the change of government, this was something the Liberals backed off on. But we know there are people that want to proceed with that, which is just a fundamental lack of recognition of the good that religious institutions do in this country. And now we have, again, putting in the crosshairs of the government the ability to cite religious texts in good faith. And if I may, Faitine, the case that's often held up as an example of why this religious defense is concerning is a case in Quebec where a hate preacher was calling in a prayer. He was cloaking in prayer a call for Jews to be killed. And his name is Ardil Tarkawi, and he identifies as Muslim. But I do not want to say that he speaks for Islam or Muslims in Canada, because I do not believe that's the case. But he was not charged criminally, and the reason prosecutors didn't charge him was nothing to do with the religious defense in the criminal code. But the Bloc Québécois, which has, obviously because of the Quebec political context, a very significant desire to secularize the state, they've decided to link this sort of expression with the criminal code religious defenses that Bill C-9 now would remove. And why that's concerning is because there is no good faith call to genocide. There is no good faith call for violence. Calls for violence are already illegal and will remain illegal regardless of this religious defense. What this religious defense applies to is what's called the willful promotion of hatred. And this is something that now is subject under Bill C-9 to a lower standard, to a lower threshold with a murkier definition. And I couldn't tell you what will be captured by that, because the whole point of C-9 is we don't know. But we can't give a government more power that could be weaponized against people expressing good faith religious beliefs.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out here that this could swing both ways. I interviewed a lawyer, a charity lawyer last fall, and he talked about that no matter what side of the spectrum you're on politically, you need to be concerned about this, because when the government is defining what is hate, particularly when it comes to sincerely held faith beliefs. That can work against those on the right or on the left. And so, for the sake of everyone's freedom, this is super, super important. Now, I want to edge back though into the the trend line that you just spoke about. There is a massive difference, Andrew, between an organization and charity not receiving funding for a summer student and criminal prosecution for reading, for example, one of those three Bible verses that Mr. Miller mentioned, maybe expanding on them, maybe posting them on their social media. And so I think most churches would say, okay, we're okay with not getting funding for being able to hire a summer student. We can figure that one out. But our pastor being thrown into prison potentially for up to 2 years, as I understand it, that's a leap. Like, that's a lot more intense. So I'm wondering if you could just unpack this whole aspect for us.
So yes, short answer, yes. The offense we're talking about here is up to 2 years behind bars, 2 years in jail. That's what we're dealing with on the criminal code infraction here. And one thing that I would also point out is that the Justice Minister Sean Fraser, when he appeared before committee on this, I asked him if this would apply to social media posts, and he said yes. C-9 will apply to online speech and offline speech. And I've already had pastors reach out to me that say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Could someone go through my back catalog of sermons for, the last 5 years, 10 years on YouTube and start making criminal complaints?" And absolutely, there is a huge potential here for bad faith actors that have vendettas against either a particular faith institution or even faith in general, starting to file police complaints saying this person has committed this crime here. And even if no charges are laid, because we do have a constitutional protection for religious freedom, and that so far is not on the chopping block. The removal of this religious speech defense sends a signal to faith leaders, and it sends a signal to law enforcement, and yes, to judges as well, that what is preached from a pulpit is now the state's responsibility to determine. And that's, I think, the key here. We talk about often when we discuss freedom of expression, the chilling effect, where even if a power is not utilized, the granting of that power actually chills speech, and it chills expression, and it makes people less likely to say something. And, I've talked to so many faith leaders, and I've had some that have had a very, what's the word I could use? They've had a belief, well, we don't preach hate. Why does this matter to us? Why does this affect us? We preach love. And I'd say absolutely. And that's why it's so important to protect, speaking to a Christian audience, to protect the right of pastors and ministers and priests to preach the gospel, because in its totality, it is about love. And you can't allow someone who doesn't agree with that to weaponize the authority of the state against you. And I always tell people who have raised this, it's not about what you know your faith to be. It's about what the worst possible interpretation of that could be from someone that doesn't share your beliefs. And that's what we have to protect against.
And I need to speak to the elephant in the room here, because we're currently in a cultural dynamic where there are people in Canada that believe, to say something like that marriage, biblical marriage, is between a man and a woman, that is hate speech. There are people who actually believe that. And, to your point about the pastors, I can think of many pastors that I've heard over the last half a decade or a decade that have said that from the pulpit. And so, are we in a scenario here possibly where this could be, this whole cultural dynamic could be weaponized, particularly against people of faith, not just Christians? Like, there are many other faiths that believe this as well regarding marriage. I mean, secondly, I want to talk about the Liberal response to this. Because I've reached out to members of the Liberal Party, asked them for comment. I haven't yet gotten a response. But when you are challenging the Liberal members of Parliament on the committee or the bloc on this issue, what is their response? What is their rationale on that one?
So one of the real concerning things that I've noticed is that they haven't actually been all that willing to defend the position and speak to what happened here. So just to offer a very brief summation of the political context of this, Bill C-9, the Liberals saw was not going anywhere. It was getting panned by left and right. This is a minority parliament. The Liberals need to have one party supporting them to get anything passed. And this bill was, as we learn more about it, one that the Green MP, Elizabeth May, the NDP, the Bloc, the Conservatives all saw pretty significant issues with for different reasons, but still, we all found that this was an objectionable bill. The Liberals saw the only way to get it passed was to make a deal with the Bloc Québécois, where they would give the Bloc their support on this amendment, which the Bloc has been pursuing for quite a bit of time now. And in exchange, the Bloc would support Bill C-9. And this was made pretty transparently by the Bloc, who told us, yeah, like we won't pass C-9 without this in it. So the problem here is that the Liberals had rejected the very thing that they're doing right now when it was put to them in a private member's bill, I want to say a year or 2 years ago, that the Bloc advanced. So the Liberals at the time did not agree with this, and they may or may not now, but they're going along with it. And I think this is very important for Canadians to be aware of, because it means that there's still time for the Liberal government to do the right thing. And what we are calling on all people who are passionate about religious freedom to do is reach out to your member of parliament directly. If you have a Liberal member, a Conservative member, a Green, a Bloc, it doesn't matter. Reach out to them and let them know how important this is to you. Because I think, and I'll say candidly, my Conservative colleagues and I are on the side of religious freedom. We've been very clear on this. The Liberal members of parliament, they're the ones that right now I think are the most susceptible to being swayed on this, because they're the ones that are the decision makers right now on this. So I would say that they need to understand exactly what this means for people of faith who represent the majority of Canadians. And that's not just Christians, it's Christians, Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, Buddhists. All of us have teachings that someone else could find disagreeable. And it's why we need to ensure the freedom to explore those things and to express those things. And, to your point about specifics, like one of the witnesses who testified before the Justice Committee said that the way this law interacts with other laws, it could make conversations about gender and sexuality qualify for this new definition of hate speech. These are very much live issues in society. We need to be free to discuss these. People of faith need to be free to express their views on it. Obviously, in the context of what's happening in the Middle East, there are some faith communities that have a significant, level of geopolitical discussion that is influenced or informed by their religious beliefs. That needs to be protected. Orthodox Jewish rabbis have spoken out and said, yeah, that this isn't protecting us. You may think it's protecting the Jewish community, but this targets us as much as it targets everyone. So an assault on one religious group's freedom of expression is an assault on all religious freedom.
Okay, well, let's talk about the math of this situation, because from what I can tell, with the Liberal Bloc alliance, you have about a 20 vote margin that will get this thing through. So, in order to stop the bill on the floor of the House of Commons, we need to see at least 20 members of parliament in that Bloc Liberal coalition that say, no, I'm not going to support this. However, we have a situation where the Liberal Party of Canada is just one seat away from a majority right now. Could there not be a scenario where, let's say that there's one member of parliament, perhaps Elizabeth May from the Green, or perhaps even a member of parliament from the Conservatives, that say, hey, okay, just forget about the Bloc for a minute. I will work with you. I will vote for C-9 if you deal with the bad portions of this, if you deal with that amendment in order to broker this. And then, of course, obviously it could be dealt with even further in the Senate at committee. Is that a possible way to deal with the vulnerable aspects of this legislation?
So I'll say two things. I mean, there were already a number of concerns with Bill C-9 before the religious speech defense, before the religious defense amendment came in. And we were already seeing that this bill could be used against faith communities, against various political groups. It could be used to chill protests. And again, lowering, like, even if we strip away the religious defense amendment, the bill still introduces a new definition of hate that is going to expand the capture of what could be prosecuted. So I do not believe that if we just undo this amendment, that C-9 is salvageable. Now, whether another party will, try to make such a deal with the Liberals, I don't know. I can say from a Conservative perspective, we cannot support C-9. And we were already sounding the alarms about it even before this amendment made it dramatically worse. So we believe the Liberal government needs to do the right thing here, pull the bill entirely, and find a way to respond to the calls from the Jewish community and all faith communities that have been targeted by hate. You mentioned churches being burned and vandalized. This is something that my former employer, True North, did a tremendous job and does a tremendous job of tracking and mapping in the absence of any sort of mainstream media attention on this. So I think we need to protect religious communities from hate, but we can't do it in a way that censors Canadians and specifically the very communities that legislation is designed to protect. So we think that absolutely C-9 needs to be pulled, but we want to make clear in our communications to members of parliament exactly why we are concerned by it, and say that we cannot allow legislation that targets the very groups it's supposed to protect. So I'm encouraging all those tuning in to reach out to your member of parliament, regardless of who it is. I mean, even if I'm your member of parliament, I still like hearing from people that are supportive of the work I'm doing on this. But reach out to your member of parliament and tell them this isn't partisan. It doesn't matter if you agree with the Liberals on everything else. If you're a person of faith, this will target you, and it will target your pastor, your minister, your imam, your rabbi, whatever it is. And I would also say make sure that people in your faith community are aware of this. A lot of the time, and I say this as a Christian, it's easy to just try to disconnect what we're doing from politics, because no one wants the church to be politicized. But separation of church and state is meant to ensure the state does not intervene in the practice of your worship and the practice of your faith. And that's what we need to ensure is protected. So it's not about getting political. It's about asserting and preserving your religious freedom.
Okay, well, thank you for weighing into that. So this isn't just a bad amendment. You're saying this is a bad bill across the board. The Liberals are saying we need this in order to protect faith freedoms, to push back against hate speech and hateful actions. The Conservatives are saying, hey, you're not administrating, you're not enforcing the laws that are currently on the books. And so this is definitely a time where Canadians need to make their voice heard, obviously, if they care about this. So I want to talk about, though, kind of the silver lining in some of this. And that's what we saw happen before the Christmas break, where we had hundreds, maybe thousands of phone calls that I know our network participated in, other networks across the nation. And then we saw this dynamic with the Justice Committee where it looked like they were roaring ahead. And then all of a sudden they would cancel the Justice Committee meeting, and then they would reschedule it. And then we thought that they were going to be extending it through the Christmas session in order to get this back to the floor of the House of Commons and to the Senate and push it forward. And then they decided not to do that. It was like this super frenetic back and forth dynamic. I was wondering if you could comment on, number one, the impact of those phone calls and this whole dynamic right before the Christmas break.
Yeah, the last 2 weeks of the parliamentary calendar in December were I still haven't quite recovered from it. Now we're like coming up on a month later. We were expecting marathon meetings. The Liberals were saying we're going to have meetings, 16-hour days, 5 days a week. One time they were toying with even having us go right up until Christmas Eve. And their message that they were putting out was, we want C-9 passed and we're not going to let you stand in the way. When news leaked of this agreement between the Liberals and the Bloc to put this amendment forward, it actually awakened a large number of your followers, I know as well, people that said, whoa, whoa, whoa. And they started to pay attention. And my office, people not knowing that I was going to be eventually taking the lead on this, was besieged by emails and phone calls. And we saw the Liberals, I forget the number now, but they canceled a couple of meetings. They shortened meetings. At one time, they had it, they canceled it, they scheduled it, they canceled it again. Like, we just did not know what was happening. And the way it works in committee is that technically you have a meeting schedule, but a meeting doesn't exist until it's called. And the call of the meeting typically happens a day or two before. And we were waiting until 11 p.m. on a Monday night to figure out if we were going to have a meeting Tuesday at 8 a.m. And just, okay, well, we never got the email, so I guess we're not. And then we got one Tuesday morning saying we'd have it Tuesday afternoon. But this was proof of a couple of fundamental things. One, it was proof that the Liberal government just did not know what it was going to do on this. I think they were caught on their back foot. They didn't know. We heard rumblings that different parts of the government hadn't talked to other parts. So that was a key aspect here. And then the other dimension of this, and I think this is the part that's absolutely crucial here, and I would remind people of this, is that MPs were hearing about this, which means their party leader was hearing about this. The minister was hearing about this. And the only way to explain this was the public pressure that was forcing something they thought they could do very quietly and very easily to realize, wow, if we do this, we're gonna poke a hornet's nest. And they did poke the hornet's nest, but we need to make sure that the people in this country continue to keep up this pressure, and that the government knows there is a cost to this assault on religious freedom.
Yeah, there's a massive interest in this whole conversation, and I know that just by our inbox here at For My Canada. So I want to drive to where are we at in the timeline? So Parliament is going to be coming back here in short order. Is this something that could be sealed and cinched one way or the other within the next, 4 to 6 weeks, or do you see this, sort of being drawn out right into the summer break? And are phone calls still the thing that Canadians should really be focused on if they want to make an impact?
So phone calls, emails, letters, these are all very valuable. And I put a point of stressing the personal. The personal is a lot less easy to disregard than, just clicking a form email or something like that. And really try to get your member of parliament to engage with you and explain why they support this. And some of the responses I've heard from people that have reached out to their MPs have been just misrepresentations of the very thing that they've done. So I think that's a bit of an important point. As far as timeline, Parliament returns January 26th. We do not know when the next Justice Committee will be called. Our new schedule is Monday, Wednesday. We may have a meeting the 26th. We may not have one until the 28th. We may not have one at all for 2 weeks. We just don't know. As it stands, the committee suspended. So technically, the meeting that we had last time is still in progress. The meeting has never been adjourned. So it could be reconvened at any point. And in that case, we would pick up where we left off, which is debating Bill C-9 line by line. Now, we have said very candidly, and I have said that we are going to work tooth and nail and fight tooth and nail to stop dangerous legislation from being passed. Complicating things is that there are two other bills that are in the pipeline for review by Justice Committee, one of which is a bail and sentencing reform bill that has a lot of things that conservatives were asking for. The other is a bill that tightens up penalties for intimate partner violence. Again, something that it has some flaws to it, but there's a lot of good there. And I think it would be easier for us as parliamentarians, and it would be easier for Canadians to find consensus on these bail and sentencing bills and these intimate partner violence bills reforms. And we were saying, let's deal with something that is not divisive, and let's deal with something for which there is more consensus, for which there isn't an assault on civil liberty. And what we saw in December is that the Liberals really wanted to hold these bills hostage to say, you have to pass Bill C-9 before we can get to this. So our ideal outcome right now is that the Liberal government lets the Justice Committee focus on these things for which there is a far greater appetite from Canadians to see some of these reforms put in, and pull Bill C-9. That's the goal, and it will only happen, I think, with political pressure on the Liberals.
Thank you for that. And thank you for emphasizing the importance of that personal contact. That is an absolute game changer. I do want to let some of our viewers know here that when you sign a petition, unless it is a parliamentary petition or it is a petition with an organization like For My Canada that has an auto trigger that is sending an email to the Justice Committee or to the relevant elected officials, in most situations, you're really just signing up for an email list of the organization that is hosting that petition. So watch for the parliamentary ones, watch for the ones that have that auto trigger. So there's just a little pro tip there for everybody that wants to really have an impact. And so phone calls are important. And my read on this is that the real power brokers in this, obviously, are those members of parliament that are maybe in tight races in the Liberal Party, in the Bloc caucus, maybe the ones that have expressed a personal faith, whether it's Christian, Muslim, or Jewish. And those are the ones that really need to hear from us right now, that might consider changing their vote or bringing a different opinion to the caucus table. So let's definitely keep the pressure on. And before we land our time together here, Andrew, any final words for those that are watching?
Yeah. I just want to say thank you. This can be a very lonely battle sometimes when you see dangers in a bill and you're trying to scream at the wind and, no one's hearing you. But this was something where I've been really encouraged and motivated by the response from Canadians on this, and the people sending me messages to keep going, to keep fighting. I got a letter in my office just this morning from a 10-year-old girl who actually is in my riding, a Christian, just, saying how she wants government to protect people of faith. And this is so important. And this is not a battle that one person or a caucus of people in Ottawa can fight. It's a battle that all Canadians are engaging. So I just want to say thank you and keep it up.
Thank you for that encouragement, Andrew. And I must say, when you stepped out of your journalistic role here in the nation and ran for office, at first I was like, oh, you're such an incredible commentator, and was really feeling your absence there. But now that we see you in action right there in Parliament, speaking of this issue, we are so grateful for your presence there. And I'm sure this will be the first of many important issues that you take the lead on in the days ahead. So thank you so much, Andrew.
Thanks, stay tuned.
All right. Well, there you have it, everybody. That's where things are at as of today. So want to encourage you again on a few things. Swing by formycanada.com. Sign up for the 12 days for freedom. We're going to move together, making thousands, maybe tens or hundreds of thousands of phone calls to our elected officials to bring our voice to bear on this issue in the next critical, consequential window. Also want to say, if you appreciated this content, please like, subscribe, share, get it out there in the feeds of all your friends and like-minded loved ones, because when we all just do that little bit extra, it really, really helps bolster our impact together. And it is our monthly partners, our regular donors, that enable us to stay on the front lines, advocating, coaching Canadians on critical action points in consequential moments like this. So if you want to see us stay at it, please consider swinging by formycanada.com and making a donation. Every amount, small, medium, or large, makes a massive difference. And we do really, really appreciate it. Thanks again for joining in. And let's remember, the nation goes to those who show up.